This is Jocko Podcast number 126 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
And tonight also joining us is Mr. David Burke. Good evening, Dave.
Good evening.
On September 27th, 1950, approximately 60 American prisoners who had been confined in prison were taken into the prison yard in groups of 14 with their hands wired together. These men were forced to sit hunched in hastily dug ditches and then were shot by North Korean troops at point-blank range with American M1 rifles using armor-piercing ammunition. Of the two seriously wounded survivors, only one lived to recount the gruesome details. Unnumbered civilians estimated at between 5,000 and 7,000, as well as soldiers of the Republic of Korea, were also slaughtered between September 23rd and September 27th, 1950. Sergeant Kerry H. Wynell, formerly with the 23rd Infantry Regiment, 2nd Division, Korea, was the sole survivor of the infamous Daejeon massacre. And he testified at a congressional hearing. And I'm going to read some of that transcript. Here's Sergeant Wynell. Toward the last, they was in a hurry to leave Daejeon, to evacuate Daejeon, so they took approximately the last three groups pretty close together. I witnessed the group right in front of me shot. After they was shot, we was taken to the ditch and sat down in the ditch and shot. And then Senator Potter asks, "What happened to you when you were shot?" And Sergeant Wynell replies, "I leaned over against the next man pretending I was done for. In firing, they hit my hand." Senator Potter, "How were you? Sitting in the ditch?" Sergeant Wynell, "They was aiming at my head. I have a scar on my neck, one on my collarbone, and another in my hand. They hit me 3 times. And you played dead?" "Yes, sir." After they thought everyone was dead, they started burying us. I came pretty close to getting panicky about that time, but somehow or another, I figured as long as I had some breath, there was hope. In other words, you were buried alive? That is right, sir. I might add, in that whole group that I was with, there was not a man that begged for mercy, and there was not a man that cracked under the ordeal. Sergeant, how long were you buried alive? That is hard to say, sir. As I say, I was shot around 5 o'clock in the morning, and I stayed in the ditch until that evening, until what time it was dark. I would say approximately 8 hours, 7 or 8 hours. Now that is from a report on Korean War atrocities written by the Subcommittee on Korean War Investigations, and I want to repeat one line again from Sergeant Wynell. He says, "In that whole group that I was with, there was not a man that begged for mercy, and there was not a man that cracked under the ordeal." So think about that. Think about the will and the discipline of those men to be facing certain death at the hands of a murderous enemy, but to face death with solemn silence and show no signs of breaking. And I've said before that war brings out the worst in people, but it also brings out the best. And that is but one of thousands upon thousands of examples of the dedication of our military fighting men. And I'm going to read you another example from the same war, around the same time, but this one is an award citation. And it reads, "The President of the United States of America takes pleasure in presenting the Silver Star to First Lieutenant Armor Thomas Wilford Fife, United States Army, for gallantry in action as a member of Company B, 72nd Tank Battalion, 2nd Infantry Division, in action against an armed enemy on 19 September 1950 in the vicinity of Yongsan, Korea. On that date, Lieutenant Fife was in command of a platoon of tanks charged with the support of infantry elements in the defense of Yongsan perimeter. The enemy attacked his position with superior numbers and a fanatic determination to penetrate through to the division main supply route. The enemy attack was successful in routing the friendly elements and inflicting casualties to the extent that the organization and combat effectiveness of the positions was completely disrupted. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Lieutenant Fife disregarded the heavy enemy fire and dismounted from the protective armor of his tank to reorganize the foot elements. After reorganization, he remained on the ground and successfully reestablished the positions by controlling both the foot elements and his tanks by means of radio communications. During this same date, while engaged in a friendly attack against the enemy, Lieutenant Fife again displayed gallantry by refusing evacuation after being wounded. The leadership, loyalty, and gallant actions demonstrated that day by Lieutenant Fife are in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service. So, Lieutenant Fife was under attack from devastating enemy fire, but he did not remain in the protection of his tank. In fact, he did the opposite. He exited his tank to organize troops and stop the enemy attack. He risked his life to lead his men. And he would continue to lead even after wounded. Now, Korea was not the first war for Lieutenant Tom Fife, nor would it be his last. Lieutenant Fife had actually already fought in World War II. He fought in Korea, and he fought in Vietnam. He also received 3 Purple Hearts for each of the 3 times he was wounded, once in each war. And in addition to the Silver Star from Korea, he also received another Silver Star for his service in Vietnam, and a Legion of Merit, and a Distinguished Flying Cross, and survived all that and served our great nation for 25 years. And I will say that it is my absolute honor to have retired Colonel Thomas Fife on the podcast today. Sir, thank you for coming on.
It's nice to be here, I think. I listened to that story. It brought back tears. Quite frankly, I'm upset just because of the memory of that. It was a horrible experience, but one that had to get done. And I still remember getting out of that tank and wondering why in the hell I was doing it. But something had to be done. When you see thousands of people coming at you, and you have nothing but your weapons, and the guys needed some help. They were willing to, I guess, run. I don't know. That was what they needed leadership. And that's the only thing I could think of, to get out and try to be there with them. And thank God we turned them around.
Yeah.
And we were able to stop the enemy. You can't understand what it's like to be there and having thousands of people come rushing at you. And the best you can do is shoot your tank guns and your machine guns. And they just kept coming. They just kept coming. I mean, talk about discipline. Those guys were disciplined too. And we had to get our guys together, and we did. and I think I was lucky. I was damn lucky. By the way, my wounds weren't that serious. I got shot in the ass, and it closed up. The wound closed up, and so it stopped bleeding, and for all practical purposes, I was as good as new for a while. So, I mean, it wasn't that serious a wound. I mean, I'd hoped to be evacuated to Japan, but didn't work. So
your $1 million wound turned out to be like a 50-cent wound.
At least. It was, when I got wounded, I felt the blood rush into my pants, and then it stopped. So why not keep going, So as far as I was concerned, the wound was over, and when I finally got to the MASH hospital, the doctor said, nothing we can do for you. It's going to work its way out or stay there forever. It eventually worked its way out, which is how I ended up being evacuated when we were up in North Korea, and got to a hospital ship, Navy hospital ship, and they took the piece of metal out of my butt, and then MacArthur just said, General MacArthur had said, we're going to be home by Christmas. Mm-hmm. So my objective was get off that hospital ship as fast as I could and get back to my unit. And of course the Chinese hit. Yeah. And so I was now trying to get back to my unit, and the Army was totally screwed up. We didn't know who was where. So I ended up flying to Pyongyang, landing in Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, and the airfield was totally surrounded by fire. We were destroying all of our equipment and whatever else. We landed our plane, the plane landed, and I had to go find my unit. And nobody knew where it was. So I got on the road and started hitchhiking. And a guy came along, happened to be a classmate of mine who was in the Signal Corps. He stopped, saw me, picked me up, took me back to where he was, which was Corps headquarters. And they didn't know where in hell my outfit was. So finally, they took me back to the MASH hospital, another MASH hospital. And the MASH hospital knew where my unit was. And they took me back to my unit in an ambulance. Now, I wasn't wounded. It was just a way to get me back to my unit. I still remember those days. A terrible experience, but fun.
It's hard for people to understand that, and I have that discussion with people a lot when you're saying, hey, this was the worst time of my life and also the best time of my life at the same time. Let's get into Korea, but let's talk a little bit about sort of where you came from, how you grew up, starting with, I guess, Sioux City, Iowa.
That's right. Well, I was a kid growing up in the middle of the United States. I was reminded on the way over here, I was talking, when Pearl Harbor happened, I was almost 16 years old, and I was in a movie theater. And they stopped the movie, and they announced that the Japanese had just bombed Pearl Harbor. I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was. Now, I knew where the Hawaiian Islands were, but I didn't know Pearl Harbor was in the Hawaiian Islands. When you're in Iowa, there's no oceans. Nobody, you don't think about oceans. And so here we were in this movie, and I was almost 16, as I said, and I said, hell, the war will be over before I ever get called in. Well, that turned out to be wrong. So, as I said, I was going through high school. My whole objective while I was in high school was going to become a chemical engineer and go to Cornell University. Why? Because my best friend's oldest brother-in-law was a chemical engineer working in Sumatra. Well, when you're growing up in Iowa, Sumatra sounds like a pretty good thing to be doing. So that's why I wanted to be a chemical engineer, and I was going to go to Cornell because he went to Cornell, and that was going to be what I was going to do. Well, the war happened, and I suddenly became 18, and you get drafted. It's hard for people to realize today, every place you go, people were in uniform. There weren't people walking around in civilian clothes. The only people who were in civilian clothes were those who couldn't qualify because of physical disabilities. So everybody was in uniform, no matter where you were. So I got drafted, and fortunately, my dad was smart enough to send me off to Iowa State before I was 18, and I got 2 quarters in as an engineer. So the Army, in its great wisdom, decided to make me a combat engineer, which was a hell of a lot better than being an infantryman as far as I was concerned. So I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Now, when you're from Sioux City, Iowa, Columbia, South Carolina is eons away. It took us 5 days on a damn train to get there. So we got there, and all of us soldiers get off the train, and the first sergeant got us all lined up there, and he's calling roll, and he says, "Fife," and I yelled, "Fife." And from that moment on, I was Fife in this organization. So, anyway, that was in March of 1944. And so we went through basic training and learned to be a combat engineer. And I became a demolition specialist. Now, it's hard for people to realize, here's a kid who grows up in Sioux City, Iowa, and suddenly is handling explosives. I had no more idea of doing that in the Man on the Moon. So, in the training, we were primarily learning to build bridges and take care of roads. That was our primary mission. But we also were taught to be infantrymen. Combat engineers have a secondary responsibility. And so we ended up, fortunately, going to Europe. When we were in training, we had no idea which direction we were going to go. But in retrospect, I've always felt that we were lucky to go to Europe rather than to the Southeast. However, when I got to Europe, and it was colder than hell. I wasn't so sure that was a really great decision, but it worked out all right. But our primary role was to go to Europe and take care of the roads and all the things that engineers do.
And so you showed up there. Were you right around the Battle of the Bulge time frame?
Yes. I mean, the Battle of the Bulge was, as I remember, right around Christmas time of 1944. 44, yeah. And we got to the continent right at that time. But our unit went to Luxembourg. it primarily was helping General Patton's army make a 90-degree turn and go north to help stop the Germans. And so the roads had to be taken care of, and that's what our unit was doing. So during the actual combat at Bastogne, we were working on roads and keeping the roads open for the Patton's army to get up there. Our unit eventually eliminated the Germans, the last Germans from Luxembourg, in a little town called Vianden, which is on the Aare River, right across from the Siegfried line. And so the 1255th Engineer Combat Battalion turned into an infantry outfit for a brief period of time. February 12th, 1945, we got rid of all the Germans, the last Germans in the country of Luxembourg.
The combat engineers, I always want to give them their due, because they continue to keep roads open. And when we were fighting in Ramadi, it was the combat engineers primarily that they had the duty of mine clearance, and it was a brutal and obviously a highly dangerous job for them to be out there clearing those mines and keeping those roads open. It's a hell of a job.
Well, as a demolition specialist, one of my jobs was mine clearance, and I was operating a minesweeper on this road down into the valley at Vianden, and behind me were two tanks from the cavalry unit, and the Germans could see the tanks. I guess they could see us too, but they sure as hell were looking at the tanks and shooting at the tanks, and a lot of their machine gun fire would ricochet off the tanks, and that's how I got hit. With ricochet off the damn tank, it got into my leg and arm, but superficially. I mean, all I did was go back to the aid station, get bandaged up, and back into my unit. It wasn't any hospitalization at all, that kind of stuff.
Another 50-cent wound for you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I had a lot of those.
So how long so did you stay over in Europe until the war ended?
No, actually, in March, the unit got orders for me to return to the United States because I had an appointment to the United States Military Academy.
Okay.
And so my very first airplane ride was from Liège, Belgium to Paris. And I remember going into this office in Paris, and I was dressed in my battle gear, so to speak. And they looked at me and they said, and I was still wearing my steel helmet. And I can still remember this sergeant saying, "We got to take care of this guy. We got to dress him up." And so they put me in all brand new clothes. 2 days later, I was on an airplane flying back to the United States. 27 hours later, and 5 stops en route, we ended up in Washington, D.C. So I ended up, my first time ever visit the Pentagon, here's this 19-year-old PFC dressed in brand new clothes, walking into the Pentagon. And I can tell you, I wasn't sure what the hell I was doing. But I finally got orders to go to Cornell University. Cornell University, what for? To get reoriented towards academics.
Okay. So wait, so you had orders to West Point, but they were going to send you to Cornell for a little while to prepare for it?
Well, no, I had an appointment to the academy.
Okay.
if you had an appointment with the academy, and in fact, this is still true today. If you have an appointment with the academy, they take you out of combat and bring you back someplace safe. And but they brought us back. There was about 300 of us at Cornell, all from different parts of the service, whether it be Army, Air Force, or back those days it was U.S. Army Air Corps, and we were there for them to get reacclimated to academia.
Turn your brain back on.
Yeah, thank you. And so that was.
At this point, did you know you wanted to stay in the Army as a career? Had you enjoyed your time in Europe and you said, you know what, I think I'm gonna go the distance? Or
no, I had no idea. It wasn't until after, well, very quickly, that my appointment to the academy was an alternate appointment. And the principal, if he qualifies, the alternate doesn't get to go. And my principal qualified. So now what do they do with me? And the Army, in its great infinite wisdom, decided to send me to Officer Candidate School. So they sent me down to Fort Belvoir to the Engineer Officer Candidate School. The Army knew they were going to need a lot of second lieutenants over in the Southeast Asia. And so, anyway, in the middle of Officer Candidate School, the war in Japan ended. Now what? Well, they stopped Officer Candidates. They slowed it down, I guess is the right word. But I continued on and graduated end of January of 1945, and here I was now a second lieutenant.
So you got your commission.
Yeah, and I had and now I also had a principal appointment to the military academy. So what do they do? So they kept me at Fort Belvoir training recruits. And then in July, they discharged me from the Army to enter the military academy as a cadet in July 1st, 1946. It was somewhere in there that I sort of liked the Army.
Got it.
But I knew if I wanted to be an engineer, I damn well had to get a college education. Well, where better to go than to a place that's supposed to train you to be an Army engineer, which is, in this case, West Point. So I went on to West Point and spent 4 years there, obviously, and graduated in 1950.
So you got commissioned. They took your commission away for 4 years. You got, and then they gave it back to you at the end of 4 years.
The only rank I've ever had was in the Army was twice was second lieutenant. Yes, that's right.
And West Point at this point is being run by just all World War II veterans, I'm sure.
Yes, in fact, our tactical officers were all lieutenant colonels who had been battalion commanders of some sort in World War II in Europe or in the Air Force. In fact, tactical officer of my company, the first 2 years was an artilleryman, and the second 2 years was a Air Force. Well, it was U.S. Army Air Corps, became Air Force, lieutenant colonel. So, and then the superintendent was Maxwell Taylor, and the commandant was a guy named Paul D. Harkins, who was Colonel Harkins. He was General Patton's hatchet man, and the deputy commandant was a guy named John K. Waters, who was General Patton's son-in-law. So they were all World War II veterans, yes.
And as were you at the time. That had to be, was that fairly unique, or was there a lot of other guys that were prior enlisted that were coming to West Point?
Of my class, who started, about 1,100 of us, I would guess several hundred were veterans of some sort. Navy, Army, Army Air Corps, yes. I would say about 200 to 300. I don't remember exactly. Yeah.
Now, when you're going through West Point, the war ends. Is war on the horizon for you, or did you guys have an attitude kind of like, well, we're going to go and be peacetime Army officers for the next however many years? Or did you see trouble brewing?
No, saw no trouble brewing. I mean, I don't think anybody really foresaw what was going to happen in Korea. In fact, the only thing that was trouble, if you would, was the Berlin airlift happened while we were cadets. And so we saw that kind of thing, but I guess maybe in our naivety, we figured that nobody was going to pull the plug and really have the Russians attack or vice versa, where we're going to do anything.
So when you graduate, what's your next move? What was your next move after you graduated?
Well, it wasn't my move. North Korea invaded South Korea, and President Truman decided to send U.S. troops to Korea. Now, one of the things when you graduate, by order of rank, you're allowed to choose your branch and then where you want to go. Well, my experience with being in front of that tank and getting shrapnel, I decided I didn't want to be out in front of the tank. I wanted to be in the tank. So I chose not to be an engineers again. I chose to go into armor. So I chose to go to, once again, growing up in Iowa, state of Washington was somewhere, who knows where. So I chose Fort Lewis, Washington as a place I'd want to go visit. So that's my first post, was to go to Fort Lewis, Washington, it turned out to be the 72nd Tank Battalion, which was part of the 2nd Infantry Division. President Truman, while I was on my honeymoon in Canada, decided to send the 2nd Division off to Korea. So in my infinite wisdom, not knowing this was happening, well, I was in Canada, and I called home to wish my mother and dad happy 4th of July. Oh, the Army had sent a telegram to my parents' house saying for me to get my ass to Fort Lewis as soon as possible. Well, I'm halfway there when I'm up into Alberta, Canada. So we drive off to Fort Lewis. And so I arrive at Fort Lewis, middle of July. Now I'm now a tank platoon leader. Never been in a tank before. Let me tell you, that's an experience most people don't want to have. The only thing I had going, by the way, many years later, my platoon sergeant told me, he said, at that time he was my gunner, he said, we felt really fortunate. We had a guy who'd been in combat in World War II, not knowing that I didn't know a damn thing about a tank. But the good news is the sergeant was smart enough to teach me how to be somewhat of a tanker on the ship on the way over to Korea.
So you had you showed up, you get done with you cut short your honeymoon, you go straight to Fort Lewis, And then you immediately load up?
Yes. My first tank ride was from the motor pool at Fort Lewis to the Port of Olympia to put the tank on the ship, and goodbye. That was my first tank ride.
Yeah, that's the point you made about, not just that your sergeant was smart enough to teach you, but equally important is that you were smart enough to listen. And I get all kinds of young officers, and I'm sure you saw them through the years, that they're not smart enough to listen to the people that have the experience, and that's a huge lesson learned that seems to always need to get learned by people.
I wish I've told more people when asked, what do you do to be successful? I say, listen to your sergeants. Listen to your sergeants. Ask them. Don't be afraid to ask, because they'll tell you. Their job is to make you successful.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are too many people who don't have egos that can allow them to do that.
No doubt about
Yeah.
it. They think it's going to make them look bad when it actually makes
Yeah.
it actually elevates them in the eyes of the sergeant.
Yeah.
And so your trip overseas, you're on the ship, and you show up in Korea.
Yes. You can't understand what it's like to be several miles offshore and begin to smell what's going to be turned out to be the Port of Busan. But you could smell it before you ever got there. And we knew we were pulling into, and I've never been to that part of the world in my whole life. And we offloaded ourselves from the troop ship, waited for our tanks to come on the other ships, and we spent 4 days in Busan waiting for the equipment to come, and then offloading it and getting it ready to go into battle.
Then, at what point? This is like the Battle of Busan. This is the Busan perimeter.
Yes.
And this is the beginning of it right now. This is, for those of you that don't know, this is North Korean troops coming down, 100,000 North Korean troops coming down, and have you guys basically squeezed onto, it's almost a peninsula. It's like a little knot of land that sticks out.
35 miles radius from the city of Busan was the Busan perimeter. That was the last territory held. Everything else was held by the North Koreans.
And so when you landed there, that's the situation they were in.
Yes. And
how did you and your troops feel about that?
I don't think we were even cognizant of how serious it was. After we loaded the tanks onto the rail cars, to go to the railhead of Miryang, which is, I don't know, 20 miles, 25 miles from Busan, where we offloaded the tanks, is where I first went into combat in Korea. I don't really know that we thought how serious it was. I got the impression several days later when the assistant division commander called all the officers and senior NCOs together in a place, and he said, "Men, we live or die here." And I thought to myself, what in the hell did I get myself into here? But that's what it was. I mean, in hindsight, I've read books about what happened in Korea, and we really didn't understand that. I mean, we were just there doing a job, and I don't think we really understood how perilous the situation was.
And at any point while you were there, did you understand the peril of the situation, or were you just in your particular battles day by day trying to hold the line where you were, and was the communications kind of not effective enough to really for you to understand the bigger picture?
We had no idea what the bigger picture was. I mean, honest to God, we were just doing our job, and as I said earlier, watching these waves of people come across the Nacton River will never, ever go away from my memory. I mean, people were just coming, and all we were doing was shooting, and they would just keep coming. And we managed to hold the line, and they didn't penetrate. So, no, the answer is we didn't understand the perilous of the situation.
Were you holding the line specifically, you guys, you were holding the line on that river?
Yes.
And so they were going to have to try and cross that river to get through the line?
Yes.
Were they swimming? Were they taking boats? What were they doing?
They were wading. It wasn't that deep.
Okay.
It wasn't that. It was pretty wide river, but it wasn't that deep. So they were able to wade across. Yeah, and they would just keep coming. I mean.
And then how long were you under intense waves of attacks like that? It was like was it like 20 days or something of the whole thing? I think lasted, I don't know, 20 days or something.
Yeah,
like
I was
that.
going to. I don't know. It seemed like forever, but I think it was probably over in a couple of weeks. My first involvement, we got off the tanks off the flat cars, and then we rolled into action, and my lead tank in front of my very eyes exploded. And I will never forget watching the tank commander go sailing out into the ditch to the right, and the tank exploding. We had rounded a curve, and unbeknownst to us, there were two Russian tanks manned by Koreans up this draw, and they fired at this tank. And we had my platoon was M4s, Sherman tanks, and gas engines, and they fired, and as soon as they fired into the gas tank, the whole thing exploded. And so my first day in Korea combat, one tank destroyed, 5 people, which were, at that time the tank had a crew of 5, were out. 4 of them were killed in the tank. The tank commander was back in the United States in less than 2 weeks after we left, or 3 weeks after we left. And that was my first day in combat in Korea. And so from then on, we got into the perimeter and spent a couple of weeks there. I don't remember. You read earlier the citation. It was on September 19th, which was when I was. Only reason I know that was September 19th is because of what you read. I didn't remember what exact dates it was, because it wasn't too long after that happened that we had the Incheon landing and everything broke out, and we were heading north. So it was a couple of weeks. I don't know.
When you were, from a leadership perspective, dealing with losing guys in comparison to when you were in World War II and you weren't necessarily in command of guys, but you're seeing people get wounded, you're seeing people get killed, what was your mindset? What was your perspective as a leader when guys were getting wounded, guys were getting killed, and then you had a bunch of, you were saying that your sergeant, they felt they were lucky to have someone that had been in combat before. And then all of a sudden I know that they were looking to you saying, okay, well, what do we do now, boss?
Well, one thing about in a tank, the crews are inside the tank. And as with the radio, you could direct people to do this and do that. And so I just told them what they should be doing. And they did it. I mean, I didn't. Leadership is just telling people what they should do, and they're trained to do it, and they do it. I mean, I learned. Actually, I talked to. Growing up in Iowa, leadership, I didn't even know what that was. I learned what leadership was all about at West Point. And that's the major difference. When I was in World War II, I was just taking care of myself. I wasn't really too concerned about the other guy, what was going on. We were all just doing our job. That's very different when you're in a combat situation. And you got people dependent on each other. And we were all dependent upon each other when we were in a tank platoon. And each of us were trained to do a job, and they did it. I mean, one of the things, my platoon didn't exist prior to, I mean, on paper it existed. It didn't exist physically. So what happened when we were activated? The guardhouse was emptied out, and we got replacements from Fort Hood, Texas. And that was my platoon. One of the best soldiers in my platoon was my loader, who had spent most of his Army career in the guardhouse. But you can't believe what a great soldier he was in combat. I mean, because he knew what he was doing, and he was trained to do it, and he did it. I will never forget those young men. I mean, I'm still in email contact with my former gunner, who's now retired as a command sergeant major, but he still calls me lieutenant. Because he kept my ass out of trouble, I'll tell you that. Right? I mean, he taught me more about how to be a platoon leader than anybody will ever understand. And I guess the leadership training I had at West Point, combined with what these young men were teaching me, allowed me to become a pretty effective leader throughout not just my military career, but my commercial career too. I'm a strong believer in that leadership works, not just in the military, but in commercial business.
Yeah.
You talked about leadership inside a tank. What did you see, and how did you see what was going on that got you to get out of that tank and tell you that you needed to get out of that vehicle and start directing what was going on the ground?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I mean, it just did it. I mean, I knew something had to be done. And my radio communications with these guys on the ground wasn't working. So you gotta communicate. And the only way you can communicate, if the radio isn't working, you got to get your butt off the tank and down there so you can talk to these guys. Because they weren't trying to talk to me. I was trying to talk to them and get them figured out what the hell they should be doing. So I just did it. I don't know what prompted me to do it. It's a good question because I have no idea.
You know, I talk about that sometimes. I talk about, as a leader, being able to identify what I would call, I just call it the void of leadership. And it's very easy to see when you are used to seeing leadership filling the void. When you see a void of leadership, if you're aware to look for it, it's really easy to see when it's there. And you go, wait a second, someone needs to step in here and take charge. And so you had that instinct of, hey, there's a void of leadership here. I got to do something, and here we go.
That's right.
As much as you said to yourself at one point, I'm going to be inside that tank. And then the damn time you needed the tank, you got out of it.
Right. Well, in hindsight, you had to do what you had to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then once you guys held the line, and it's funny because I use that expression a lot, just talking about holding your line with your personal discipline and holding the line with your subordinates, and we use it metaphorically, and it's incredible to hear and talk to you about actually literally holding the line. When you guys got done holding the line and you had defeated that onslaught from the North Koreans, what was the next phase?
Move out and move north. And the first weeks, we moved 4 or 5 miles at the most. The next couple of weeks, we moved hundreds of miles. And I remember going as fast as we could north to marry up with the guys who invaded at Incheon. And we just kept going. I mean, I don't remember how many opportunities we had to really get into combat after we cleared the Pusan perimeter until after we got north of Seoul. I mean, the invasion force invaded, pretty well cleared that stuff away, and so the city of Seoul was open when we went right through it, and we kept going north. The enemy was retreating pretty fast, and we were just going as fast as we could, driving up the roads, and in fact, our unit got almost to the Yellow River, which is about the time they decided to take the stuff out of my butt. So I was sent back to the hospital ship in the harbor of
So that's when you got shrapnel, was when you were up by the Yalu River?
No, that's...
Oh, that had already, that's right, that had happened earlier, and now it was coming back.
The stuff was worked. Now, one of the things you've got to remember is this piece of metal is in my butt. Now, in a tank, the tank commander has a little thing to sit his butt on while he's riding around in the turret. Well, you don't do that when you have a piece of metal working its way out. It is painful, to say the least. And so I couldn't hardly wait for that to happen, but they wouldn't let me go back to the hospital until it got reasonably close to the surface. So when it got close to the surface, they evacuated me. And it was in November of 1950 that they sent me back to the hospital ship.
And then I think you covered this, but then you got done, the metal comes out, and then you go back again because you're thinking you're gonna get home by Christmas if you can get back to your unit.
And I got back to the unit eventually, but I didn't get home by Christmas. In fact, by the time I got back to the unit, the 2nd Division had already moved back south, almost to the Han River, and so I found the unit again somewhere south of, somewhat north of the Han River, but still, we were still in North Korea, but it was the south part of North Korea.
Mm-hmm. And were you in a situation? Did you guys get dug in? Because I know part of the Korean War was like they dug in, and it was almost like trench warfare. Did you enter that phase, or were you guys still moving north and south?
We, as tanks, we never dug in. Now, later on, I think the line stabilized pretty much around the 38th parallel, and there was a lot of digging in defensive positions as well, but that was more infantry, not the tanks.
So how did you end up? What was the last phase of you being over there like, and what ended up bringing you back to the States?
Well, the line sort of stabilized around the 38th parallel. We would go forward, and then we'd come back. We would go forward, come back. Oftentimes, we would do patrolling, I guess is the right word. Patrolling in force. A tank company with an infantry company attached, riding on the tanks, would blast forward to some enemy position, get into a firefight, take the ground, and then we'd move back again. We were just going back and forth around that so-called, it now turned out to be the 38th parallel, but it was generally that sector. Oftentimes, the infantry would get into a lot more heavy firefights than the tanks would. I spent a lot of time supporting infantry attacks with my tank guns and machine guns, covering their advancements forward, but dug in, no, the tanks were never dug in.
And then how long did that last for? How long was your unit deployed over there? Was it the whole unit that ended up going home?
No. At a certain point, they decided that people who had been there a year would come home, and we started rotation. And I was one of the first ones to rotate out of my unit because I had some decorations and because I'd been there a year and et cetera. I had a lot of points, and so I was sent back. I guess I got back to the United States Labor Day of 1951. So I was evacuated. The word evacuated is probably not the right word. I was just sent back home.
And then, so you get back home. You know, here you are coming home from Korea. It's obviously you at least experienced some pretty intense stuff. And you know, you hear a lot of times, especially nowadays with guys coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan, with guys struggling to readapt to life back in America. And I think it's a little bit different because when you came home, you were still in the Army. And yes. I think that's the best thing for veterans. You know, if you're still in, I think the veterans that have the hardest time are veterans that get out, and all of a sudden the brotherhood that they are used to is gone, and the mission that they're used to is gone. But is that what you experienced, and you came home and you still had your mission of moving forward in the Army?
Yes. I mean, I had no feeling of not being appreciated. I mean, obviously, when I came back, I had a daughter born while I was in Korea. Scared the hell out of me. I mean, I still remember this 4-month-old child I held for the first time. First time I've ever held anybody that size. Scared the hell out of me. I mean, I was more scared about that than a lot of the things that happened to me. But anyway, I came back, went to Fort Knox. They sent me to school to learn to be a platoon leader, and then they asked me if I wanted to stay there at Fort Knox and run an officer candidate company. And I did. And so we spent several years running an officer candidate company. And then they decided they didn't need any more officer candidates at Fort Knox, so they closed that down. And I got selected to be an aide to John Waters. John Waters was General Patton's son-in-law. And a wonderful experience. Learned a lot from a real gentleman. He was a brigadier general at that time, became 2 stars, but he eventually retired as a 4-star general. And but he taught me a lot about being an officer. Not so much about leadership, but being an officer and a gentleman. He was an outstanding person, and I learned from him. I mean, you know, when you're working as an aide, you get pretty close to somebody, and I always feel very fortunate that I was able to be his aide and learn. 'Cause I don't know if you know, he's the one in the movie about General Patton sending troops in to rescue somebody in a prisoner of war camp. He was the one who was in the prisoner of war camp, and he was wounded very seriously there. But I mean, and it was quite an experience working for him for several years.
That was multiple years.
Pardon?
Multiple years as an aide?
I spent 2.5 years as his aide. So, and then as he went on to his assignments, I went on to my assignments. And one of the experiences I had in 1956, I was a company commander of a tank company in Baumholder, Germany. Yeah, and he at that time was running the Military Assistance Command in Yugoslavia, and he decided to come up and visit me. Now here's the Major General, and he's coming to visit this captain in Baumholder, Germany, and it was you can't believe all the other stuff that went on. What the hell is the general coming to see you for, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, we got through all that. But he didn't come to visit me in Vietnam, but he was Pacific Commander. But he took care of watching what I was doing. So it was an experience, a wonderful experience, and a great learning experience to be his aide.
Yeah, I was actually an aide too for the admiral that was in charge of all the SEALs, and it was a very similar situation for me. He was a great guy, and I learned a ton about the way the whole big machine worked, which you have no idea when you're a young lieutenant. You have no idea what's going on behind the scenes, and I definitely got to learn a lot about that. And the same thing you just talked about, you know, I had a great relationship with him, and he took care of me and my guys on many occasions, which was great. And since he was the admiral, one time he was a surfer, and I was organizing a trip for us to go to Hawaii, and we were going to see some of the SEALs that were stationed out in Hawaii. And the big thing I had to do was get organized so that when we got picked up at the airport, there were surfboards in the vehicles ready to take us directly to surfing as soon as we showed up. And it's the same, you know, people say, what do you want these surfboards? So you just get the surfboards ready. That's what you need to do for the boss. And then, so you did that, you end up, so 56, you're a company commander, and what happens in between then and...
and then I was in a unit, Second Armored Division, and at that time In 57, they had something they were going to rotate the 4th Division, 4th Armored Division, which I'd been in at Fort Hood, rotate it to Germany, and the 2nd Armored Division was going to rotate back to Fort Hood. However, I'd only been in country a little over a year, and I wasn't eligible to rotate back. So they, in their decision, for those of us who weren't eligible, had to be reassigned, and I was reassigned to be at the Secretary of the General Staff at Heidelberg, which is U.S. Army Europe. So now I'm going from being a company commander in Baumholder, Germany, which is the end of the line, all the way to the very senior Army command in Europe. And I'm working now for a 4-star general in his General Staff organization. And I had, once again, a chance to go from knowing what's going on down here to watching what's going on, very senior leadership. And it was another opportunity. For a year and a half, I had that job, and it was just a great experience learning, if you would, the other extreme of where you'd been. That was and then rotated back to the United States in '59 to become a math professor at West Point. But I spent 4 years being a math professor, and then went to the Army, the Command General Staff College out at Fort Leavenworth. And then the Army decided that they needed to have people counteracting McNamara's whiz kids. And so they figured that somebody who'd been teaching math probably could. So they sent me to the University of Michigan to get a degree in what turned out to be operations research, but the Army sent me to get a degree in automatic data processing, which they didn't have such a thing at Michigan, but the closest thing to it was industrial engineering operations research. So I spent 2 years there getting a degree, and then rather than go back to the Pentagon for a utilization tour, I volunteered to go to Vietnam. So
when you say that the Army knew that they needed someone to counteract the whiz kids, and I've talked about the whiz kids and I've covered them somewhat because a lot of the people operational on the ground said, hey, these statistics that you're coming up with don't take into account the human aspect of this conflict in Vietnam. So was that something that was felt and understood inside the Army at that time? I mean, clearly it was.
Yes, and the whole idea was to take somebody who knew something about the Army and give him some education that these kids, so-called kids, had, and statistical analysis and all that stuff. And so to be the other part of the board, and that was to be my utilization tour. Yeah. So
there's a great example of that, and it's the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley, and Colonel Moore talks about it. The fact that what the whiz kids basically said, well, one of the things that they said was, okay, we can kill 170 Vietnamese soldiers for every one of ours that they kill. So statistically, we'll just keep running that problem over and over again, and we'll end up winning. And I always point out, and which everyone points out, and I'm sure you would point it out as well, is what they didn't take into account is the fact that, number one, 170 Vietnamese killed to the Vietnamese was not as big of a deal as we thought it would be. And we also didn't take into account that one American dead is a lot bigger than the statisticians thought it would be to us. And that's just a huge tragedy to go into that situation like that.
Well, in fact, I've many times thought body count was the dumbest thing we've ever come up with as a measure of success in combat. And I have said that I don't know how many times, and I am still convinced that was the dumbest thing we've done over the time. And I was there participating in it, and it was terrible.
Yeah. So let's go to Vietnam. So you volunteered for Vietnam in what, 1966?
Yes.
Or 65?
66.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do they automatically say, okay, well, you're a lieutenant colonel, that means you're gonna take over a squadron or a battalion?
I wish that was the case. in fact, they give the Army more credit than it's due. No, they, along with everybody else, I was a lieutenant colonel, arrived in country, and I was assigned initially to be the executive officer of the Combat Operations Center of MACV, which is the headquarters of all. And the Combat Operations Center was Westmoreland's Operations Center.
Right.
And it was run by a Marine Brigadier General, Bill Jones by name. And was a great man. I mean, and I was his exec. And we, quote, ran the war, so to speak. The word "we" is a very loose term. From the COC, and that was headquarters right there in Saigon, and it was a cushy job. I mean, went to work on a regular hourly basis. I used to go in at night once in a while because President Johnson was going to talk to some of the action officers trying to find out what was happening to these patrols that we were sending out.
Wow.
I mean,
That's a serious sign of micromanagement, huh?
oh, let me tell you, that was micromanagement of the first order, and I saw it, absolutely saw it in happening more often than I care to remember. But I had one of the evenings, I met one of my former colleagues, Armour, who was commanding the 1st to the 4th Cavalry of the 1st Infantry Division, and he told me he was going to rotate home in December. I said, can I get that job? He said he'd take me up and introduce me to General Depew, who was the division commander. And I went up and I passed the test. You'd have to know General Depew, and he was a no-nonsense guy. He would. People thought I was crazy because General Depew was relieving battalion commanders for incompetence, right and left. And I figured, you know, if you go up and do your job, you're going to be okay. So I went up, and General Depew interviewed me, and General Hollingsworth did. He was the assistant division commander. And Hollingsworth was an old cavalryman. I mean, and he couldn't. The two of them passed on me, said it was okay, and so I got reassigned to command of the 1st and 4th Cavalry in December of 1966, which was a plum job. It was not only a plum outfit, but General Depew used the cavalry squadron like it should be used. Many times later, my successors were all not as lucky as I was. I mean, I was able to fight my unit as a unit. I had 3 ground troops, 1 D troop was a helicopter troop. I had 31 helicopters in it, and I had, and the division commander would assign B Company of the tank battalion that was assigned to my unit. And then, since there wasn't any real enemy aircraft, he assigned several of the batteries of the anti-aircraft unit to my unit. So I had a unit that unparalleled in history, because General Depew believed the cavalry was supposed to go find the enemy and then keep him there until his infantry could show up. And we did it more often than not. And one of the stories I tell people, I'm self-styled king of the Michelin rubber plantation, which is, 70 square miles of trees. And historically, there's little communities of workers throughout this place. And these little towns became havens for the North Vietnamese. And so we took it upon ourselves to evacuate everybody out of the little villages to the perimeter of the plantation, and then took it upon ourselves to destroy the villages, because the North Vietnamese were coming in at night, using these places and shelling our units. So we were destroying all these little hamlets. In fact, I had an engineer company assigned to me, and one of the contests was between the captain, who was the engineer company commander, and myself. I'd be up on my chopper, and he'd be down on the ground, and he was going to implode these villages. Now, if he imploded them all, he won. If any of the villages' buildings would still be standing, I won. Now, what did we win? A beer. And more often than not, I won. He didn't win them. He didn't lose many, but we got. So, in the spring of 1967, Ambassador Ellsworth Bunker arrives in Vietnam. The first unit he wants to visit is mine. Everybody is, what in the world why did he pick this, and why is he coming to see you? Well, he gets out there, and he's got a 4-star general, a 3-star general, and then division commander, all with him. And then we're out in the middle of nowhere. I'm briefing the ambassador. I get emotional when I say this. He says, "Colonel, I got more correspondence on my desk from the French about what in the hell you're doing up here, destroying their village and all the people and causing all this commotion. What are you doing, and why are you doing it?" And I explained to him that why we were doing it, because these villages were being havens for the North, and they were coming in and killing our troops. And I'll always remember him saying, "Colonel, you just keep doing what you're doing, and I'll take care of the French." And I said, "God bless you." I mean, I still get emotional. Was that man, that gentleman, understood what the hell was going on. And here we talk about State Department people not knowing what's going on. He knew what was going on, and he told me to keep doing what I was doing, and I did it. But I will always remember him. I think at the time, I'm not sure of this, he was either the oldest or next to oldest ambassador we ever had in the State Department. But he was out there trapping around in the boonies with me. And it was a rare experience. But anyway, it was one of those days, when you really think you counted. Yeah.
Indeed.
And he was, to me, that's leadership too. He knew what the hell was going on, and he was able to tell me to keep doing what I was supposed to be doing. Yeah, he was a great man.
So those operations, was that the primary type of operation that you'd be doing, is going into areas and basically disrupting what the enemy was up to?
Basically, the mission was search and destroy. And what we did was try to find the enemy and then destroy him. So in the Michelin plantation, we thought the enemy was not there. But we spent, there was something called the Iron Triangle north of Saigon. It's about 30 miles north of Saigon, which was our operational area. And it was traditionally a haven for the North, and or the whoever. Anyway, the guys that were shooting at us, and you never know whether they're North Vietnamese or they're conscripted South Vietnamese, but they all look the same to me, and they still do. I've never. In Korea, I couldn't tell the difference between a North Korean and a South Korean. I still couldn't never tell the difference between a South Vietnamese and a North Vietnamese. Maybe there's a way, but I never figured it out. And so we just went in and constantly were searching and destroying. And if we find the enemy in strength, our job was to hold him there until General DePuy could get his infantry into helicopters and bring them in and really defeat the enemy. On occasion, we got in more of a firefight than we expected to be, but we generally were pretty good at finding them, and the tanks would roll right through this forest and knock the trees right down, and it was no problem at all. And I was in my helicopter directing, and you could see and you tell the tanks where to go, and the tanks and the ACAVs, which were primarily what the unit was all about. And so that was our job. Yeah.
So often I read about units that were over there that never, or very, very seldom, would they see the enemy. They would lose guys to sniper fire, they'd lose guys to mortar fire, they'd lose guys to booby traps, but very seldom would they see the enemy. And, obviously there's units that are different than that, but it sounded like you were able to find the enemy on a fairly regular basis.
Oh yes, or they found us. Who finds who is not sure. There's an answer to that, but yes. More often than not, we had contact. I had more than I would like to admit casualties, which didn't happen because they couldn't find the enemy. I can tell you, they could find us, and I often remember somebody a long time in my career tell me something about reconnaissance by fire. And I remember with a tank you had a lot of machine guns and you could do a lot of reconnaissance by fire. And the trouble with reconnaissance by fire is you never know whether they see you or not. You just know there's somebody shooting at you. Well, that's good enough. That's good enough. You don't need any know whether he's aiming at you or not.
One of the things that also I talk about and I've read a lot about is the Vietnam War being very difficult from a leadership perspective for some leaders more than others, but because you had draftees and you had draftees, not just draftees that got drafted and, okay, I'm going to go do my duty, but draftees that got drafted that literally did not believe in what was happening and barely even believed in America as a country. How much of that did you see, and what was your leadership approach to those troops?
I saw zero of that. I mean, I don't know if it's just absolutely lucky. I know I'm not that naive. I mean,
I'll tell you, the last few guys I've been talking to and reading about this, and there's something that I've noticed a trend. So have you heard the term millennials, about the new up-and-coming kids?
I know what millennials are.
Right. So people complain about, and especially from a leadership perspective, people talk to me about, well, I've got my company and we've got these kids checking in. They're millennials. They're different. They're entitled. They don't want to work as hard. And I started thinking about in my head, well, basically you've got a workforce that's a little bit different. And this is very similar to the draftees in Vietnam who had a different attitude. And what I've found from good leaders is it didn't matter. It didn't matter that they had draftees. As a matter of fact, General Mukuyama, who I just talked about, when I asked him about draftees, he said, I didn't even know who was a draftee and who was a lifer. I couldn't tell the difference. And Colonel Hackworth wrote in his book, he wrote, I loved the draftees because they were straight shooters. They weren't trying to protect their career. They tell you what they thought, and you could take their input, and you could do something good with it.
I've said all along, the soldiers I served with in 3 different wars got better, and they were all draftees. I mean, I didn't ever serve with an all-volunteer outfit. They were all, no matter where I was, they were draftees. And they all did their job. I mean, I've never had anybody tell me it wasn't their job, wasn't what they wanted to do. They just did it. And I don't know if that's leadership, or it was just the way it was. And they were all proud to be in our outfit. I mean, now, I'm sure other people later on, I mean, I've heard of people later on in Vietnam having real problems with drugs and all that kind of. We didn't have any of that. But now, fortunately, I left in 1967, so I'm not sure how things got worse, perhaps, but I think drugs are an issue, period. But I don't know. I didn't have any of that kind of a problem. And as I said earlier, I'm not naive. I believe in knowing exactly what's going on. And the way you find out is walk around and talk to people. You don't sit in your tent or in your helicopter. You got to go down and talk to the guy on the ground and find out what the hell's going on. And that's, there's a fellow who wrote a book. His name was Peters. This is many years later. And he wrote the book. It's called Management by Walking Around. And there's a guy made a fortune just doing what I used to do. I mean, it's scary. But I mean, it's true. That's what leadership is all about, is find out what's going on. And then using some common sense to tell people this is what you're supposed to do, or give them some guidance. But I mean, people who used to tell me, well, you know how to do things because you can order people to do things. And I'm saying, let me tell you something. Ordering a guy to get out of a tank to fix the track when somebody's shooting at you is not anybody willing to just do it. I mean, he's going to do it because he knows if you don't get the track fixed, we're going to get our ass killed. I mean, we're going to get going. He's going to do it because that's his job. And if that may be leadership, but I'll tell you, it's discipline that comes from people being trained right and taught right and treated right. If you don't treat people right, they deserve to treat you wrong. And I'm a great believer in treating people the right way.
Well, I'm just from hearing you talk about treating people the right way and listening to people, you're you say when I told people to do stuff, they did it. Well, yeah, that's because you treated them well, you listened to them, you had those relationships with your troops, and that's what makes people, like you said, when you got to have somebody that's gonna go out and fix a track under fire. Well, that's somebody they're not gonna do that just because you order them to do it. You better have some relationships. You better have treated them well, and they must understand the why on the mission as to like, hey, why this is important. So when you look back at World War II, Korea, Vietnam, I was from a tactical perspective, actually maneuvering troops. Is there any big lessons that you would think back of that you say, this is something that I did consistently, or this is something that I would never do because I knew it would cause problems?
I can't think of anything. I'll go back to what I said earlier. I've always believed, and maybe this is from growing up in Iowa, I don't know, just treat people like you'd like to be treated yourself. And it worked out. I don't know. I told you about my first sergeant calling me Fife, which pissed me off, quite frankly. But because he was a guy who didn't treat people like to be treated. And I've always was amazed how much I exulted in the fact when he got busted. I mean, we were in England on the way over to the continent, and he got busted for I don't know what reason, but he got busted back to being a private. That's a big jump from first sergeant down to being a private, and I was happy because I didn't think this guy was. He's also the guy when I took the test to see whether I could be smart enough to go to the military academy. He said, "What the hell are you taking a test for like that for? You're not smart enough to go to the West Point." And I always would like to be able to say to this guy, if I ever saw him again, I'm sure he's dead by now, I told you so. But, if you don't treat people like they should be treated, you deserve to be treated the opposite way. And I just have always practiced, or tried to practice that anyway. And so far it's been relatively successful.
That's a huge underpinning of leadership from everything I've seen, everything I've ever read, every person I've ever talked to. If you care about your people, you care about and you want to treat them well as human beings, that's the underpinning that really makes leadership work. And it's a lot of times, and you mentioned this earlier, a lot of times from the civilian side, they think, well, in the military, you can just order people to do things and they'll just do it because you're the boss. And that's not true. And it's actually, when I got out of the military and I started working in the civilian sector, I thought to myself, if you didn't want, if you want somebody to do something and they don't do it, you can just fire them. But that's not true either, because guess what? You'll run out of people really quick. And so what you have to do is you have to lead. Right. That's what you have to do.
Right.
And one of the most core underpinnings of leadership is really caring about the people that work for you. And I think the more you care about them, and I know for me, like I cared more about my guys than I did about myself. I wanted to make sure that they were okay and that things were going to go well for them, and that was always my priority, my real priority. And I suppose someone that was very jaded might think, well, then you're going to get passed over. Things aren't going to work out good for you because you're more worried about your troops. And the opposite's actually true.
That's right.
And my career was beautiful. And all I ever tried to do was take care of the people that worked for me.
Because that's the way you get to be successful. Hiring people or working with people, in the civilian sector, you hire people. In the military, whoever arrived was that was it.
You get people.
But I've always said, your job is to make the boss successful. and vice versa. The boss's job is to make them successful. And if you work that, it works out for both of you. And to me, leadership, we talk about it, but it's easy if you follow a few basic principles. You don't have to have all the stuff that goes. I mean, people write books on leadership. You've probably written books on leadership yourself.
Well, yes, indeed.
But the fact of the matter, there's some basics, and you just expand on it. You don't. It isn't that magic if you just follow a few basic principles.
One of the things we talk about in the book, actually, is simple, not easy.
Yeah.
Because it is. And we say that in our book as well, is we didn't invent any of this. This is stuff that's been around, and there's no eureka moments, and we're not claiming to have anything startlingly new. This is fundamental stuff that if you think about it, some of it might be stuff you already do as a leader, some of it be stuff that you know you should do as a leader, and just making it clear for people to understand is probably the only real benefit of the book itself. It's like, okay, this is good stuff.
Yeah.
But no rocket science there. I didn't need to be a whiz kid to write that book, I can promise you. Hey, so you mentioned earlier when we were not recording that you actually ended up going back to Vietnam.
Yes.
And were you a civilian at that time?
Oh, yes. My wife and I like to travel, so we've traveled most of the places in the world by now, and she wanted to go back and see where I'd been in Vietnam, and I wasn't too sure about that. But anyway, we had this opportunity, and so we went back, and I went to Hanoi, which was an experience. I mean, go to the Hanoi Hilton and seeing how they've turned that into a propaganda place. And I still remember seeing this picture on the wall of Senator McCain and a couple other guys, I can't remember the names. Another one was a high school classmate of mine, Bud Day by name, who was an Air Force retired colonel, got the Medal of Honor. But anyway, and they were showing them in these white pants and white overshirt, as if they were on a barbecue. You know, everything you've heard about this place was just, and they showed you some of the cages that they had people in.
We actually have had two guests on the podcast that were in the Hanoi Hilton, and one of them went back and was talking us through that same propaganda. Went back to the Hanoi Hilton as a civilian, and just the feeling he had was pretty strong.
I can't imagine. I mean, but when I was there, I was just seeing it from the propaganda and what they, because it's a big tourist attraction apparently for the Vietnamese, and so we obviously saw it and knew what it was and for what it was, and I hear all kinds of stories about the people that were there, but and then we went from there to Da Nang, and then down to Saigon, and I'd hired a car and a guide to take us back up to my old operational area, and drove through the Michelin rubber plantation, which was sort of a fun experience to see. Now it's no longer Michelin; it's a state-owned. They took it over, obviously, from the French, but it looks exactly the same. I mean, trees are lined up, rubber trees, just rubber trees. And the people are out there working the trees. And I don't know if you know this, this is an aside. You cannot burn a living rubber tree. It won't burn. And I've tried hard. I mean, I have 2 flamethrowers in my unit, and we tried hard to burn those trees down on the sides of the road. Doesn't work. And so anyway, but we went back up to the old operational area in the same place. I was pretty close to where I got wounded when I was in Vietnam. I was in my helicopter flying over this river, and I was pretty close to where that happened. I could do that because I had the map coordinates of where I'd been wounded before. Otherwise, I'd guarantee I'd never be able to recognize the place. But my old base camp, which was because I had helicopters and so forth, I had an airfield, is now being turned into a strip mall. So we watched all that happening, and, but it was seeing Saigon again was it's an amazing experience to see what they've done. You see all these tall buildings now, but the one officers club that was on the roof of one of the hotels is still there, exactly the same, and my wife and I went up and had lunch there. And in my time before I went out to the unit, I used to go up there, and we'd go up there, and you'd watch out here and see the sabers, not sabers. What do you call the rounds that are
Tracers.
Tracers, thank you. See all the tracers from being fired up or back down, and it was sort of a unique experience because you really weren't fighting a war. I mean, in Saigon, it was so different from there when you went out into the field. But it was fun to go back and see what they've done. And I was impressed with how much the South Vietnamese have really been serious about getting real business and going, and a lot of things happening business-wise. Up north, it's still agrarian. It was still agrarian at the time, very agrarian. Very few tall buildings, very few businesses, and so that you could identify. And maybe it's still the same, because that was 11 years ago now, but and I don't know what's changed over there. But so the North Vietnamese won the war, so to speak. I say that with tongue-in-cheek, actually, but they won the war. But I'm not sure that the South Vietnamese aren't coming back and taking over and running the country. They certainly have the financial strength there, and I hope that's the way it eventually will work out.
Well, the way the rest of the world's gone, it's been freedom and democracy and capitalism that eventually wins the long war.
Yeah.
And we've seen that worldwide, so hopefully it'll happen for them as well. How did you get wounded, your third time getting wounded in Vietnam?
Well, I was one of the missions we had. Every evening we'd go into a perimeter, and most of the time we'd be in a perimeter around an artillery unit, so they could fire at night without worrying about getting overrun. And so I put all of our unit into this perimeter from my helicopter flying around, and I noticed a bunch of sampans evacuating the area that we had. So I thought, in my John Wayne failing, I'm going to go down and shoot some of these guys. So I got the pilot to I was flying, in this case, in a one passenger bubble helicopter. And anyway, so I had this M40. You know what an M40 is? It fires, it looks like a shotgun shell.
Okay.
And so I'm up there, and I'm shooting at these guys in the sampan. And I'm doing pretty good, missing a lot, but hitting some. But one of them shot back. And my God, it hit me in the leg. And so I told the chopper pilot, take me back down to the headquarters, which was where the squadron surgeon was. And I will never forget, he cut my pants away, and there was blood spurting right out, all the way out, at least 18 inches from my leg. I hit something they call a spurter. And he said, this is the captain speaking to me. Colonel, you goddamn dumb son of a bitch. You could be dead. So anyway, he bandaged me up, and the medal's still there, still in my leg. But
you returned to duty though, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I hadn't been in command more than 30 days. I was scared to death. I couldn't be evacuated. Hell, I had to finish out my tour. I mean, so.
Well, one of my friends named Tim Kennedy is a Green Beret, and he has a TV show coming out called Hard to Kill. I think maybe we need to get you on that show.
No, somebody might take me up on it. I mean, I've been fortunate. I mean, a lot of people got hurt a lot more serious than I've been. And I've seen some. In fact, I've had too many. I hurt pretty seriously. I had one of my XO was in a helicopter and got shot up through the seat of the helicopter, and all the shrapnel, everything went right into his leg, and he was forever in bad shape. I mean, so I've seen a lot of people get hurt pretty badly. I've been fortunate. I mean, but I've also had the attitude, I'm not going to get shot and killed. I mean, no, it's worked out, but going back to, when I got out of that tank to go back in Korea, I had no more idea that I was going to get killed. That wasn't going to enter into my mind. I just had something to do, and that may be foolish, but it's just the way it was.
Yeah, I think if you were thinking about what could happen, you wouldn't do anything.
You couldn't do anything. You're right.
Anything.
Yeah.
So you wrap up your squadron commander in Vietnam, and again, I mean, you were taking. How often would you guys? You're getting in firefights a lot. What was your rate of casualties like? How many guys did you lose? How many people were killed while you were there as a squadron commander?
How many were killed? Probably 10. Not too many. I mean, when you have ACAVs, do you know what an ACAV is? That's a personnel carrier. Yeah. I mean, ACAV stands for Armored Cavalry Assault Vehicle, but it was the M113s back in those days. I don't know what they're called today.
We still used M113s. We used M113s in Ramadi, the same exact vehicle.
Right.
So we are very familiar with them. We both ridden in the back of them.
Yeah. Well, they're pretty well protected, and the tanks we had Patton tanks, and they're protected. So, we had casualties because in a cavalry troop, we have infantry riding in the ACAVs. So when they get out, they got hurt. But I don't know the statistics. I wrote enough letters, but not very. I mean, one's more than enough, but I don't remember how many I wrote. But because I did that for everybody who was killed. But I don't know the statistics. Not too many, not overburdened. I mean, in the sense that I got several people's names on the wall. I go there every year just to stand there. But I don't know, Jocko, I don't know the answer.
Understood, sir. When you got home from Vietnam, you talked about coming home from Korea and everyone's in uniform, and we hear stories of guys coming home from Vietnam and they literally get told, don't wear your uniform around. How different was the reception from World War II, Korea, to Vietnam?
Well, coming back from Vietnam was a sad experience. We thought we'd been doing a good job. We thought we were doing the right job. And I came back to the Pentagon, and I sort of witnessed the experience of the country being up in arms about Vietnam. Didn't feel too appreciated, I guess is the right word. And yet, it didn't feel like, I felt like I'd been doing a good job. So I didn't have any bad feelings. Most of those feelings about what was going on came after I got out of it. I mean, I retired in '69, and things began to go to hell in the country about what we were doing over there. Right after I got out, I guess. My job when I got out, when I came home, was it's at the Secretary of Defense's level. I told you earlier, the Army was sending me to school to learn to counteract the whiz kids. Well, guess what? When I came back, the Army sent me to be a whiz kid. I was sent up to the Secretary of the General Staff, Alan N. Tobin's organization, which was called Systems Analysis, and that's where all the whiz kids were. And they had a representative of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, all four of us, and we were sort of the other end of the teeter-totter. We were supposed to balance some of these smart young men that were the, quote, whiz kids. And as I tell people, I'm never a whiz or a kid, but I was in that organization, and it was an experience. They wouldn't let me work on anything Army, and I had, because they knew I had to go back to the Army. See, that was, and you had to be sitting there making decisions that could be against the Army, what the Army wanted, as opposed to one of the things I was involved with, because I was involved with the Navy and the Air Force. The Navy wanted to build another nuclear submarine. Well, there's only so many capital ships. That was by law. And so the Navy, I asked why there was I can't remember now, I think 13 capital ships or whatever the number was. I asked, why is that number 13? It took quite a while for them to figure out the answer. And it really was very simple. It had gone back to the League of Nations, partly into 2000, in 1920 something, when they parlayed out to the various World War I winners the number of capital ships, i.e. called battleships, numbers of ships that each country would have. And that's where this number came from. Well, that was just, now, I learned to ask that question because when I was going to Michigan, one of the professors said, this was in statistics class, I want to know what you want to, not what the results are, I want to know what the assumptions are. And so I was asking this assumption, why is there X number of capital ships? It was a simple question. I didn't know I was creating a challenge. I mean, it turned out to be exactly what I was saying. It was a strange phenomenon for them to try to figure out why there was that number. I don't know what the world is now, but I can tell you at that point, this was in 1968, I guess. That was a question that took a while to answer. By the way, I don't know how many capital ships we have. I don't know what they're called today, but we have a lot more than I think we had back in those days.
So what made you decide to retire?
Well, I had 25 years in the military. And I decided I wanted to think about doing something else. Part of it was I used to listen to people tell me, you just order people to do things and they do it. And I said, that's just a lot of baloney. So I wanted to go and see, cut my, if you would, teeth on trying something in the civilian world. So I sent a bunch of resumes out, and I eventually was hired to go down to Texas. And the fellow that hired me was a retired Navy aviator who, by the way, as an aside, was assigned to the first squadron, I think it's called, that flew jets off of aircraft carriers. A guy by the name of Felix Jablonski, who was a wonderful man. But if you wanted to know what time it was, he'd tell you how to build a watch. But he hired me, and our job there was to figure out how to use, from LTV's computer resources, how to use these in civilian application. And one of the things we did was we developed for Dallas X's and O's that they used to do on the chalkboard on the computer screen. And this became a way that apparently the Dallas Cowboys would teach the guys how to react to whatever plays it was. So that was using some of this fancy technology that LTV had to build something that was applicable in civilian life. Well, Ling of LTV, Ling Timkovot, suddenly got challenged because he was creating a huge empire, and the antitrust people got after him. And all of a sudden,
the part that I was in went from 30 people to 4, and I was one of the 4. And I don't know, to this day, I still don't know why they kept me, because I'd just been there less than a year. But the guy who tried to hire me into computer sciences previously offered me a job with computer sciences. I mean, even though I had a job, I knew that this place was not a place that long-term going to be. So I went to work for computer sciences, and I spent 15 years there, and ended up retiring from there. As one of the presidents of one of their divisions. And one of the things that my bosses used to say, I was one of the few leaders they had. We had a lot of managers, but I was leading a group, and we became very successful, much more so than I ever imagined we could be. It was primarily in sales and marketing. And I had a boss that said, who was from IBM, and strict IBM suit kind of guy. You know, you've heard all the stories about. And he said, if I were to go back to my comrades at IBM and tell them that I just hired the former Army colonel to be head of sales, they'd all think I was goddamn crazy. And so, anyway, I had a great career at computer sciences, and as I said, I retired from there, and I'm not a typist. When I was going to high school, if you took typing, you weren't going to college. It was back. So this thing called voicemail appeared to me, and I thought, ugh. So another fellow and I started a company in the voicemail business in 1984, and it was pretty successful, and we sold it in 1998, and I've stopped working since then.
Well, that is awesome, and I know we kept you here for a couple hours now, and probably a good place to at least stop for this particular session. Is there anything else you want to say? Anything else you want to close out with?
Well, I can say this, that I met my wife on my first assignment from the Pentagon, and my job in the Pentagon, among other things, was to control the number of troops on the ground in Vietnam. Congress mandated there be 550,000 people on the ground. My job was to be sure that that number was met. So when the Secretary of Defense went to for Congress, he could always say that we have never. So on a quarterly basis, I would go to Hawaii, and then people from Hawaii, Thailand, Korea, Philippines, and Hawaii would all meet at the headquarters there up on the hill, and we'd go over, because when Westmoreland would want to replace an ACAC battalion with an infantry battalion, there's different numbers and everything's different. So we had to do all this monitoring and keeping track of how many troops we had. My wife was a school teacher in California, and she was over there on a vacation, and one of my former colleagues from Vietnam, she knew him, and somehow or another, we met. For the next 2 years, we dated cross-country. She in California, me in the Pentagon. And I would go every quarter to the Hawaiian Islands for this meeting I'm telling you about. So I'd planned the meeting to start on Tuesday, so I could fly from here to California, spend some time with her, then I'd fly off to Hawaiian Islands, and then on the way back I'd stop and do the same thing, and then I'd be back here. So anyway, we got married in after I got out. I retired in '69, and we got married in October of '69, And the reason I'm still living today is because of her. She keeps me alive, takes care of me. I mean, so she's the principal reason that I can sit here and talk to you.
Well, then we'll say thank you to you for coming on, and we'll say thank you to your wife for getting you here. Because, sir, once again, this has just been an absolute honor to be able to talk to you, to be able to hear the stories and the lessons that you learned, and thank you from all of us for your service, your sacrifice, and it's been an honor.
Well, you all deserve the honor. I mean, you guys, I don't know what it would be like to be in the service today. Frankly, I mean, I see these guys. My nephew deployed 6 times, twice to Iraq, once for the Somali extraction, plus 3 other times just deploying, you know. And now, how he did this, I'll never know, but he never left Camp Pendleton. I mean, he did, he was a drill sergeant down at MCRD, but he'd commute back to Pendleton. I mean, his wife lived there the whole time, his 20-some odd years in the Marine Corps, all in the same. I never figured that out. I moved around like, but my wife would tell you. She and I got married after I got out of the service. We're in our 17th house. We've only been married almost 49 years. I mean, so everybody said, well, you were in the military. We didn't do this. She was never in the military. We moved all the time since then. I mean, you stay in San Diego.
I'll do my best, sir. I'll do my best. And again, absolutely the troops that are out there today, and there's a lot of troops that listen to this, guys out there holding the line and doing those deployments over and over again. But, you know, the work that we do today is based on the lessons that we learned from your generations, from the 3 wars that you fought and what you passed on to us. And it was an honor for us to continue to carry the flag. So thank you, sir.
Keep carrying it, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. And Colonel Tom Fife has departed, and obviously it is a honor to get to talk to him. And thanks for setting that up, Dave.
Yeah, man, that was awesome.
Much appreciated. 3-war veteran. I mean, come on. Come on. That's just unbelievably awesome to sit and listen to. And you know what? Thanks, Dave, for setting that up. And also thanks to everyone that supports this podcast so that we have the opportunity to bring people on like Colonel Tom Fife and be able to share those lessons learned, which there was a ton in there. Mm-hmm. So thank you all for supporting. And Echo, if people do want to support,
sure,
can you maybe fill us in on how to do that?
Sure. Let me start with our company.
Oh.
Origin. That's the company. OriginMaine.com is the website. There you can get, Jocko has supplements. You can get Jocko supplements, Jocko Super Krill Oil for your joints. Joint Warfare for your joints. Don't run out, by the way, Dave Burke. I don't know if you ever been in the situation of running out of Super Krill. When you depend on Super Krill, it's a bad situation. And if you ever want to reduce the risk of running out, do the subscription thing. That's what I do, kind of.
Subscription,
yeah. You just get your allotted amount per month or however often you need it. Also, pre-mission supplement. It's called Discipline.
Hold on, Dave. You were firing up on Discipline. You said to me, and I quote, "I live on Discipline."
Yeah, it has become a daily part of my life for sure.
You've got it in the brain.
Yep.
You use it before you work.
Yep.
You're studying, you're working, you're prepping. That's your go-to.
The stuff is awesome. I use it probably more than I should. Yeah, it's legit.
I don't know if there's some kind of a, limitation health-wise. Like if you're drinking 9 gallons a day. I don't know how many gallons.
I'll let you know. Yeah.
Check.
All right. Well, there it is. It's a pre-everything. Pre-mission, pre-workout, pre-test taking, pre-meeting, pre-jiu-jitsu.
Now, you're going to get mad or whatever, or you're going to give me your attitude because
Sure.
you know how you make fun of me because I wanted it to taste good,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah.
You make fun of me.
Yes,
and there's not even that much I can say about that because it's a legitimate thing.
true. Yeah.
For me, Big Jocko, to be like, oh, I want it to taste good.
Yeah,
it's kind of a weakness, right? It's kind of soft, right? Well, that being said, we have another flavor coming. And I'm going to tell you what.
What, bro?
Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you 2 things. Well, first of all, it tastes good.
Yeah, I know, bro.
Second of all, it's basically pina colada, but I can't call it that. That's like I can't do that.
Yeah.
I can't do that.
Yeah,
so
no.
it's going to be called like coconut pineapple.
Sure.
We're not going just straight pina colada because I just can't.
No.
That's not how.
Yeah, no, that's not how. Yeah, you did mention that,
Yeah.
and I'm impressed that you're sticking with the delicious,
good.
luxurious,
It's
tasting.
really good.
But that's one of those things. Like you like pina colada, you like that flavor. Like I've heard of people not really liking it, but that could have to do with the fact that how like when you drink alcohol too much and it has like like tequila will have it. Pina colada is like that. If you just drink too many of them, you get drunk, you have a bad
get sick,
experience.
whatever, yeah.
Now you can never drink it again.
Yeah,
now
yeah,
if you
sure.
smell it, you feel off.
Are you
that
thinking
whole
of
scenario.
tequila right now?
Tequila is like
Tequila's
that for sure.
Jaeger.
100%.
Jaeger.
Jaeger,
I had
yes.
During my younger years, I had like a 14-month hiatus from Jaeger after I had a
Bad situation.
bad sitch.
Yeah, so pina colada.
Because I was young
like
and
that.
stupid. You know what? Young, stupid, and motivated.
Dang.
Like, when you're actually motivated, like, oh, I'm going to do this. Yeah, that's bad.
Sure.
Dumb.
Yeah, but
Check.
if you haven't had that experience with pina colada, I would assume that that's a pretty high rate of acceptance as far as deliciousness goes, in my opinion, or by my estimation. I think my hypothesis or whatever. Nonetheless, it's called discipline. It's pre-mission. This, whether you love pina colada or love lemon lime-ish flavor with other delicious factors in it, that's a good thing. But it's good because it makes your brain more healthy and your body. Pre-mission, pre-workout, pre-test, taking, pre-meeting, pre-jiu-jitsu, pre-workout, cognitive and physical force multiplier. That's what that is. So get on that one, of course. Also, gis and rash guards. Dave Burke. You
didn't talk
right?
about Molk.
Yeah.
You missed the Molk.
Yeah. I didn't really miss it. I was going to save it for last, but no.
Okay.
Okay.
No, I'll get back in my lane over here.
No,
on
because
this
I
side.
just had a whole thing I was going to do
Okay,
with
cool.
it. But
Rash guards, tell me about it.
I feel like we should do the Molk now because you
Go.
kind of brought it up, which is, if, for lack of a better term, it's actually, it is a better term. It's not protein powder. It's protein powder, but it's a better term for this particular protein powder, Molk.
Yeah.
Mint chocolate, just in case you didn't know. Dave Burke, you on the Molk yet?
He's not on the Molk yet. He just told me he's going to get it this week.
Well, I will say this. I never was into protein powder. Aside from, when you're
still
in high
not.
school.
You're still not.
I'm still
You're in the Molk.
Right, correct. But this one is one of those good ones where, kind of like you in the discipline where you're like pounding it all the time. So I give my daughter dessert. Right?
Oh, yeah. This is a dessert.
It's
Straight
a
up.
straight up dessert.
Straight up.
Yeah,
It tastes that good.
And don't put a couple of drops of vanilla in there. Try to do that. Put 2 drops of vanilla,
really?
put an egg, and put it in the blender. I
Dang.
swear to you. In fact, you know what? Don't do it. You'll be
Okay.
in the same boat as me.
That's weird.
Nonetheless, it's like a dessert, and there's protein. No, it's good, man. Because I used to make these milkshakes when I was young.
Do you think
just a
you
homemade
think it's
milkshake.
making you more swole?
Probably. Probably is
Check.
big time. Nonetheless, I used to make these milkshakes when I was young. They had vanilla, egg, like a teeny tiny piece of banana, milk, and some other stuff, some sugar in there, and it was good. It was like a solid milkshake, like a good, like almost like you bought it from a gourmet spot.
No, the Molk is no joke when it comes to milkshake simulator.
Yeah, mint chocolate.
New
That's a
flavors.
good one.
Peanut butter's coming. Peanut butter Chocolate peanut butter's coming.
Chocolate peanut butter milk is on its way.
Yeah.
Straight up. Dave Burke, when you get on it, you're going to stay on that. So you're just going to be pounding discipline and milk like all day the way Dave Burke, only Dave
He's
Burke
gonna look
can.
like an
He
Echo.
does.
He's gonna look like Echo Charles.
Yeah. Swollen,
6 months, dude.
lifting, jiu-jitsu, milk, all that stuff. Also, gis and rash guards. We can talk about that if you want, unless you have another suggestion
No,
on what else
okay.
I should talk about at this
Ooh.
point. I'm saying I want to do the right thing over here. You know what I'm saying, Dave Burke? What kind of gi you have with Dave Burke? You do gi, right?
I do. I have 2. So here's the one good thing about starting jiu-jitsu at 45. I discovered the one good thing about it instead of starting at 15. Is I never have any of those stories where I tell about how uncomfortable the gear is or how the rash guards gave me, or the gis are hard to wash. I got Origin main gis time 2.
From the
times
get-go.
2. From the get-go,
Oh, yeah,
out of the
this
gate.
is like,
Very
this is like
first-
someone that never had a flip phone
Yep.
in 1994.
Yeah.
Just woke up and they had an iPhone 6.
Started with the iPhone 10.
Yeah,
Out of the gate.
you're just out of the gate.
Yep.
Yeah.
Origin main rash guards. So I don't know what it's like to have grown up with all the
Yeah.
terrible gear you guys use.
You don't know what it was like,
Yeah,
man.
back in the day. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's actually good news in my opinion. Because not working, but like working out and doing jiu-jitsu in a junk gi, probably the first gi I had, man. You know, you ever when you buy your first suit, same deal. Like you don't know, I don't know. I don't
It's
know how
just
the
like that.
suit.
You thought that was just
Yeah,
how.
like, I see a guy with a suit on, let me go buy one. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever. So same thing. So I went and bought a gi, and it was like I bought a cheap one.
yeah, $40.
Well-
No, straight. See, I bought my first gi was I bought from the Aikido store
Yeah.
because the jiu-jitsu place, they were like, it's $100. I'm like, oh, cool, not happening. I'll go find a different one.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I found
Find a cheaper one.
unbleached. Have you ever heard of this? Unbleached cotton. That was
Okay.
even cheaper
It's
than
like
the
a
bleached cotton.
off-white one.
It's an off-white.
Yeah.
It feels like it's filled with steel wool, scratching at your skin.
Yeah, but that's hard.
And it lasted like 4 weeks. So yeah, get a quality gi.
And it was
Get yourself an
Aikido
Origin
gi?
gi. That was an
Or it was
Aikido gi.
Aikido, okay.
It was an Aikido gi. It felt similar
Yeah.
from the external viewpoint to
Yeah.
a jiu-jitsu gi, but it wasn't, and it damn sure wasn't made in America.
No,
Made in Maine.
that's it.
You know what's awesome is to literally know
Mm-hmm.
the people, because we've been to the factory.
Mm-hmm.
I know the people that made those. I know them.
Yeah.
I say, oh hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm over here making a gi.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that's real. That's what's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah. And on top of that, not to mention, the that was loomed right there in the building, by the way.
Yeah.
Is from America too. That's something.
And so I was talking about Pete about this. The cotton, it's not all cotton. It's what is it?
Polyester.
Poly. It's poly. So it's a poly cotton blend. And I thought that the two strands were different and it's woven together. No, they make that actual thread is cotton, poly cotton.
The thread.
The thread
Boom.
itself
Gotcha.
that you weave is that's why you can put it in the dryer to dry like a normal piece of clothing. Not 4 hours you
Right,
pull
right.
it out and you still have to hang it up because it's all cotton and it just
Yeah.
holds onto the water.
Thick ass
No,
cotton.
gets out of there.
Yeah.
Made in America.
Yeah. Well, good. So yeah, you good. Dave Burke. Boom. Origin gi. No history of discomfort in other gis.
No stinky area of the house where wet gis are hanging up for 4 days.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, and I'll say this for all the stuff at Origin, everything they make is awesome. On their website, they talk about the hoodie. They call it the most comfortable hoodie ever.
Yeah.
I grew up
100%.
wearing hoodies. If you grew up in Southern California, when it gets really cold out, you put on a hoodie.
Yeah.
The Origin hoodie is the most comfortable hoodie I've ever owned. So that stuff is legit, no joke.
No personal offense to you, Dave, because I respect you. I do. I really respect you as a person. But your level of measuring comfort is not even close to Echo. Echo is sort of the quality comfort control guy, and he has already made this statement. So you saying it is like everyone is listening on whatever. We don't.
Yeah.
You're in the Marine Corps. You've done some. You've done some
Yeah.
tough stuff in your life. They're looking at Echo. They're like, wait, if Echo thinks it's comfortable, we're in.
Yeah.
That actual statement
true.
has meaning.
Yeah. Yeah, I will, but I will say, sure, like, of course, Dave Burke, of course, we all knew that. I am the gold standard of comfort evaluation for sure, I think. And I will second that. It is the hoodie and the pants, by the way. So, yeah. Get those as well, all made in America. The compression gear and rash guards, all that. I'm just saying there's all this stuff on the website, originmain.com. You can get all this stuff. The hoodie, the gis, the rash guards, sweatpants, other stuff. A lot of cool stuff on there. Check it out. If you want something, get something. Also, the immersion camp, jiu-jitsu camp.
Boom.
Just got a message from someone from Florida, young lady from Florida,
Come and get it.
saying, I want to go to the immersion camp, but I won't know anyone there. And
You know
I
Echo
think
Charles.
I'm the only one from Florida. What do you think? Hey, you know me kind of, I guess. If you're sending me the message, sure.
Yeah.
You know me. Probably know Jocko too.
Well, if you know Echo, you know me, and that means you know Dave Burke. You know three of us.
Three
We'll be there.
people already.
Rolling.
Boom. And here's the good thing, where when you go there, we technically, sure, knew each other. And you knew Pete. That was the first time I met Pete. I met probably, like the first 15 minutes, we met about 20 people.
Yeah.
And we hung out with those 20 people plus the other people you meet over the days the whole time. It
Yeah.
wasn't the kind like, oh, I don't really know them and I'm hanging over here and they're over there. It's not like that.
You ever heard of those like dating sites where you? No, seriously. You put
What,
in.
like Match.com.
Well, you look
or
at.
something?
Okay, so I grew up before dating sites, or I got married before dating sites. So I was just like, do the game back in the day. Like you got to go to a place where you can hopefully meet a girl, right?
Yeah.
The odds of meeting a girl are not the girl that you like and that has some sort of remotely similar interest. You go into a bar with 100 girls in there, and like you're lucky if there's one of them there that's remotely interested in what you're interested in, and you can connect. Then you got to meet them. Then you got to go up and talk to them and all this stuff. It's real hard. Then they made the match dating things online where you put in your stuff,
Yeah.
and then you meet that one person, and you connect with them, and you have all these things in common. This situation, you think about it, you're actually just going into a place where everyone's into the same thing that you're into. It's like walking to a bar and everyone likes the same stuff. Well,
Right,
everyone
right.
there likes jiu-jitsu and wants to train and wants to hang out, and that's what makes it cool.
Yeah. Yeah. No dating typically, but hey, yeah, that's a good point. Everyone you kind of converge on the topic of jiu-jitsu, and then
Yeah.
kind of everything else spawns from there.
Yeah.
That's what it really seemed like
Yeah.
to me too.
And then everything spins back to jiu-jitsu.
yeah, it's good fun. So my input is to go. That's what I think. I think go. When in doubt, go.
Dave's
And-
going.
I'm going.
Yeah.
Leif is going.
Good.
Confirmed. JP's considering.
I'll go.
He'll probably end up going. Yeah, so it'll be a little EF reunion tour
Yeah.
of the jiu-jitsu boy.
Yep. Agree. And when
Come and hang out.
you go there knowing 0 people, you'll leave there not only knowing more people, but they'll be kind of your friends. I will guarantee you'll have more actual friends after you leave. Guaranteed. This is to the lady that emailed me. That's what I think.
Right on, man. That's
Anyway.
cool.
And even if you will know some people there, I say go too, because you can immerse yourself in jiu-jitsu. Best way to learn. And, let's face it, you're in Maine. There's a bunch of lobster. They serve lobster.
Yeah.
That was one of the highlights, in my opinion. Anyway, yeah. So it is on August 26th through September 2nd. 2 sessions. Go to both if you want. But yeah, 2 sessions. There you go. All levels. Also, for fitness gear, go to onit.com/Jocko. They got kettlebells, battle ropes, jump ropes, all kinds of stuff. Good stuff. Vary up your workout. Get some new gear. It'll actually get you more in the mood to do a workout when that gear comes in. I guarantee that. Well, I don't know if I can guarantee that, but that's how it was for me when I got the jump rope. Then all of a sudden, I'm a jump roper. You see what I'm saying? It's good. Anyway, a lot of cool stuff on there. A lot of good information on there, too, by the way. If you're beginning like kettlebells or you're beginning other workout movements and you want to know some tips and, even some nutrition stuff. Really good. Anyway, go there, onit.com/Jocko. Good way to support. Also, when you get the books that Jocko reviews on this podcast, I organize them on jockopodcast.com. On the top, you click on books from episodes, and it takes you to the page. And it has, that's right, you guessed it, the books by the episode for on the episodes, by episodes. You see what I'm saying? Anyway, click on there. Takes you to Amazon. You can shop, get your books, get whatever else you want from Amazon. Your batteries or duct tape, whatever. Keep shopping. Do you. Also, good way to support is to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play.
Spotify? Do you subscribe on Spotify, or is it just there?
I don't know. I've been to Spotify.
There's a lot more apps for podcasts now.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to explore some of them too.
daily.
Yeah. I'm going to
Like
explore
new
some
one
of them.
comes out daily. Yeah. Well, either way, the point there is
Apple
subscribe
changed
to
their
them.
thing,
What do you mean?
their layout or something. So now it pops up different. Everything's different now.
Changing layouts.
Frustrating.
I know, bro. It's like, you ever realize when the layout of some? So this was a big thing on Facebook. When do you get on Facebook, Dave Burke? Do you remember?
2014.
14. Dang, that's pretty
It was a
early. I guess.
requirement for school.
Okay, there you go. So were you on Facebook when they kind of changed the layout of Facebook from something to like newsfeed?
Negative.
Jocko doesn't know anything about this. You don't know what I'm talking about at all, huh?
No, I didn't get on Facebook until probably like 2000. Might have been on, but I didn't actively do anything on it till like maybe a year ago.
Yeah. Okay, so
maybe a year and a half.
So the layout of Facebook
Something
was
like
you had your profile picture, and I'm just trying to remember what it was. It was like, I don't even remember what it was, but it was like, I think like your wall or something like that, where it's like you're just your own stuff. And then they all of a sudden switched it to this newsfeed situation. You know how like now it's like everyone's stuff that you're basically how it is now. They just switched it, and people were mad. It was like it like changed their life. They were pissed. That's what you sounded like when you just talked about the apples. That's you had that same effect on your brain. Anyway, subscribe to the podcast is what I'm saying. Regardless of the layout of any iTunes or any other applications that the layout has or has not changed. Good way to support. Also, we have a YouTube channel, so subscribe to that if you want. And if you're interested in the video version of this podcast, if you want to see what Jocko looks like. Or Dave Burke, in this case, what he looks like. Pretty handsome, I think, as far as handsome goes.
Or Colonel Tom Fife.
Yes.
See what he looks like.
Yeah, typically those are the ones that people want to see. They
Yeah.
want to see the guests. They want to see what they look like.
They know what we look like.
Yeah, they kind of already know. Except me. I guess they don't really know what I look like, because I still do get, hey, you don't look like how you sound.
Right.
Which is an actual thing. You can look like how you sound. Like, you look like how you sound.
Check.
You know what I'm saying? Dave Burke looks how he sounds. But it's not a one-to-one. It's not a face to, like, your voice sounds like this, so your face is going to look like it. It's not like that. It's like your voice sounds like this, so your face can look like this kind of real, like this group, this little variety of possible faces. You see what I'm saying? That's how it works.
Yeah. But for you, your voice does not
I'm outside of that
match
group. My face is outside of that group, apparently. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, YouTube, boom. Also, we have excerpts on there if you want. Some of the lessons that Jocko talks about. You want to share them. They're condensed, or actually they're not condensed. They're just taken out and made little videos on there. Also, enhanced excerpts. Put some music on there. Make them more.
Somebody asked for tracks, enhanced excerpt tracks into psychological warfare available on iTunes. So, does that make sense?
Yeah,
So,
enhanced.
I think it's time for psychological
track.
warfare 2, by the way. Just
Yeah,
FYI.
I agree.
I've been getting a lot of requests for things like that.
I agree, but not from a personal interest standpoint, because the psychological warfare 1 is still very effective, 100% effective for me right
Album
now.
with tracks.
Currently. Yeah,
Check.
which I will talk about after I talk about the fact that Jocko has a store. It's called Jocko Store, jockostore.com. This is where you can get the t-shirts that say Discipline Equals Freedom, like the one I'm wearing right now, or the Jocko Podcast shirt, basic, but very nice, the one that Dave Burke is wearing right now. Also,
were you telling me you got called out with a Jocko Podcast t-shirt? Where was that?
I'm wearing this exact shirt. I'm at Disney World with the family down in Orlando 2 weeks ago. From across the way, I get a good evening echo.
That's the standard bona fides.
Legit, man.
Yep, the standard bona fides is good evening echo.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah, looks good on you, of course. And even if you want the one that Jocko has on now, the one that Jocko always has on right now, the one he has on right now and always has on. You see what I'm saying? Anyway, if you want that shirt, go on jockostore.com. Or if you want a hoodie, or if you want a hat, or if you want a rash guard. Anyway, just go on there. You can see, if you want to support that way, there's a lot of cool stuff on there. If you want something, get something. It's called jockostore.com. Also, just like Jocko mentioned, Psychological Warfare is an album with tracks. Basically, these tracks are, each track, you can get these on iTunes, by the way. So each track is Jocko telling you how to get past certain weaknesses that you might have on your campaign against weakness. So, you're on the path, right? We're working out, we're waking up early, some of us. And, we're reading more, whatever we're doing. Sometimes you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that every day. You just don't feel like it on some days, but you still should do it. We all know that. But sometimes you don't feel like it, so you're about to skip the workout. Boom, you listen to a certain track. Jocko will tell you why you shouldn't skip the workout. And it's effective. You won't skip the workout. Take it from me. I know 100% from experience. That's what it is. Get it on iTunes.
Check. You know, also, speaking of subscribing, I have another podcast now. Yeah, it's called the Warrior Kid Podcast.
Good one, by the way.
Yeah. Uncle Jake has lessons. The name of the podcast is Warrior Kid Ask Uncle Jake. Uncle Jake answers questions from little warrior kids around the world. And you can get that, play it for your kids. There's no foul language. There's no talk about the My Lai massacre. It's totally separate, so your kids won't get stumble upon something that they shouldn't be listening to that they're not ready for yet. So you can check that out. Also, Jocko White Tea is available on Amazon. And if you're going to order it, well, then go ahead and order some more weights for your barbell too, because you're going to need them. You're going to need about 8,000 pounds worth, and that's the minimum guaranteed deadlift. Also, there's cans of white tea coming soon. They're going to be here in June. They're going to be available on Amazon in June. Victory in a can. Yes. Certified organic. Never thought you'd hear me say that now, did you?
Yep.
Yeah, certified organic. There you go. We're going to get rid of all the horrible energy drinks that are out there making people sick. And we're going to replace it with Jocko White Tea, which is 8,000 pounds of pure power.
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
About Jocko White Tea. Would you consider making the microdose or a version that doesn't have just a microdose of caffeine, but
if you drink no, probably not.
No more caffeine.
No, the Jocko White Tea can, I think, is 2 servings, and I think it's 30 grams.
Totally.
I'll confirm that.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have said it.
I'm
but
saying,
I'll
would you
confirm.
ever consider making like another version in the future or anything like that? Something with more
Jocko
caffeine.
White Tea hype or something. No, more.
Sure.
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. Because if you want more, you can drink more.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Or go get something, something that's going to make you all jittery.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I dig it.
Books, Way of the Warrior Kid. Series. It's a series of books, by the way. There's 2 of them right now. There'll be more. I got a note on social media. And it was from an 8-year-old warrior kid named Addison. And she wrote this. Dear Mr. Willink, I absolutely love your book, Way of the Warrior Kid. I think it's the best book ever. You know what I'm saying? It taught me about discipline and commitment. Now, every day I train before school. And trust me, it helps a lot. Your friend Addison. So, there you go. Listen to Addison. Pick up The Way of the Warrior Kid. And pick up Mark's Mission, the second book, so your kids can get stronger, smarter, faster, and overall better. And if you want to support a particular warrior kid that's on the move, making things happen, go to IrishOaksRanch.com. Get some soap made by Aiden, warrior kid. Warrior kid with his own business. He makes Jocko soap on his farm so you can stay clean. Don't forget about the Discipline Equals Freedom field manual. I met a trooper up in Yosemite. I was up in Yosemite. I guess it was last summer. And, we just started talking. And I'm like, what you doing up here? And he was like, I'm up here to get my mind right. I was like, yeah. I don't know. I got kind of fired up, get my mind right. Yeah. And that's a thing. That's a thing that you kind of got to do sometimes, get your mind right. Mm-hmm. Discipline Equals Freedom field manual. It'll help get your mind right. It'll help get your mind right.
Yeah.
And it'll help get your body right, too, by the way, if you get some of those deathcore workouts going, for sure. Yeah. If you want to listen to it instead of read it, or in addition to reading it, you got to get the audio version. Not Audible books. It's not on there. It's available on Amazon Music, iTunes, Google Play, other MP3 platforms. Discipline Equals Freedom field manual. Meditate on that. Also, for leadership, extreme ownership, combat leadership for the battlefield, for business and life. And now you can order the follow-on book to Extreme Ownership. It's called The Dichotomy of Leadership. It's available for pre-order on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, local bookstore. Hit them up. It'll be out September 25th. If you want to get one of those first editions, if you're a book person that's into the books, you like to have that first edition, order it. If you need backup with your team from a leadership perspective, whatever business you're in or whatever leadership situation you're in, you need some support, you can contact my leadership and management consulting company. It's called Echelon Front. It's me, Leif Babin, JP Donnell. Dave Burke is in the game. The website is echelonfront.com. We solve problems through leadership. That's it. That's how problems get solved in any organization. Not some whiz kid looking at a spreadsheet. Sure, we'll assess those. That's not where the problem's going to get solved, though. We might identify a problem there. The problem is leadership. The problem in your organization is leadership. We'll fix it. That's what we do. Of course, we got the muster. We're in D.C. right now for the muster. It's sold out, and they all sell out. There's one more muster in 2018. Muster 006 in San Francisco, October 17th and 18th. You register at extremeownership.com. Like I said, it is going to sell out. If you want to come, register now. Also for current military, law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, other first responders, we got the Roll Call 001, September 21st in Dallas, Texas. It's a one-day leadership training seminar that's specific to dynamic and hostile environments. Things like fires, things like combat, things like high-speed pursuit chases. That's what it's about. You can register for that as well at extremeownership.com. And until we see you at the muster or at the roll call or at the immersion camp in Maine, if you want to communicate with us and hang out virtually, you can find us on the interwebs. What's yours, Dave? David R. Burke.
At Dave R. Burke.
Dave R. Burke.
Has put the R on there.
Is your Twitter handle.
Yep.
Your Twitter call sign.
That's it. I might have snagged Good Deal Dave. Oh. Just to make sure nobody else has it. I might have grabbed that. It's hard to say.
Nicely done. Echo is at Echo Charles, and I am at Jocko Willink. And to all the military personnel out there standing the global watch for evil, thank you. And to the families of those men and women that are also serving and also sacrificing, thank you for what you do. To the first responders out there, police, law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, thanks for standing by to get some at all times. And also thanks to your families as well. And to everyone else that's out there with us, facing whatever you're facing, life, challenges, struggles, pain, suffering, uncertainty. Look at the past. Look at a guy like Tom Fife. Look what he's been through. See what men and women have gone through, what they've been subjected to, and how over and over and over again we see human beings that rise against and they overcome. So keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep fighting to move forward, and keep getting after it. And until next time, this is Dave and Echo and Jocko. Out.